Okay, so this is 101 week 7 part 4, but again, valuable for all my classes because it's a talk about plagiarism. So I mentioned earlier that the quintessential example, the perfect example of plagiarism is you get somebody else to write a paper for you, meaning someone else's words and someone else's ideas, and then you put your name at the top and you turn it in, and you make it look like it's yours. But I bet you know this already, but I got to tell you anyway. It's also worth pointing out that it doesn't plagiarism. There's no such thing as a lot of plagiarism or a little plagiarism. Plagiarism is a kind of if you had any plagiarism at all, then you fail. Then you get that F0, the F minus, the 0 grade. It's plagiarism. It's plagiarism no matter how much there is. So let's go over some simple examples. Let's say that you find a paper on the internet written by somebody else's ideas and somebody else's words, but you sort of change it, you alter it, or you shift it, or you change some bits, maybe even you add a couple of sentences, so it's mostly by someone else, but you let's say it didn't fit the assignment exactly, so you had to kind of force it to fit by cutting here and adding here and changing this and doing, right, that kind of thing. So let's say that's the case. So that mostly it's by someone else, but you did work on it to make it fit the assignment. Doesn't matter, it's still plagiarism. You still get an F0, you still get an F minus, which is a 0. Let's imagine for a second that you wrote a paper, but it's too short. So you steal a paragraph or two off the internet to make your paper longer. So most of the paper is written by you, but there's 1 or 2 paragraphs that you stole and made look like they're yours. That's still plagiarism. That's still a 0. Let's get worse. What if the paper is yours? You wrote the whole paper, but you took a sentence from somebody else and made it look like it was yours. That's still plagiarism. It's still a 0. Do you see the thing? It doesn't matter how much there is. This is the problem with plagiarism. If you plagiarize a sentence or a paragraph or a page or a whole paper, the result is the same. F0. I keep saying F0. It's an old video game. It's an F minus, which is a 0, no matter how much plagiarism there is. There's no, well, it's only plagiarized a little bit, so I should only get a lower grade. No, it's 0 in all cases. Why? Because you cheated and you tried to trick me. It doesn't matter if you tried to trick me a lot or trick me a little, it's still plagiarism. So, okay, so that's an important thing to do. Now, this can get tricky because sometimes students, like, it's very common for students, for example, that I have, they'll go on Wikipedia. Let's say they're going to write a paper about a book or a movie, but they go on Wikipedia to find out about the book or the movie, and there's like a summary. So they're going to write a paper about Macbeth for Shakespeare or something. And so they go on Wikipedia and they put Macbeth in and they get a Macbeth summary. And one of the things they know is that in the intro to the paper, it's a good idea to like summarize the thing before you get started. But instead of summarizing it themselves, they kind of steal the summary off the internet. And then the rest of the paper is theirs, their ideas, their interpretation. But they took the summary chunk off of a website because they just couldn't remember they couldn't remember the name of the character, they couldn't remember the details, so they go on Wikipedia, but then they copy it, and there's like whole sentences just in the intro. Still an F0, still fail. Because, why? Because somebody else did that work. And if you put it in your paper, and you put your name at the top, then it means it's your work. You're making it look like your work, and that's cheating, and that's a 0. So it's tricky. There are other ways to plagiarize. Let's do another one, another simple one. What if you take one paragraph from one website and another paragraph from another website and another paragraph from another website and another paragraph from another website? Is that plagiarism? Yes, it is. It doesn't matter how many different places you get it from. Still, if you're putting any amount of someone else's words and ideas and making them look like they're your words and ideas, then it's plagiarism. Okay, so this is going pretty good so far. This can get trickier. For example, a lot of my students, this is why, and I've learned, you guys know this from other places, but before you quote somebody, right, you got to say where it's from. Because you are, by the way, you are allowed to use other people's words and ideas in your paper. You're just not allowed, in fact, I love it when students use other people's words and ideas in their paper, but you got to say whose words and ideas they are. So, like, I want students to quote Plato. I want students to quote Shakespeare, quote articles about Shakespeare, or quote articles about movies. I want students to quote philosophers, but that's why before they quote the philosopher, you got to say, according to, and then put the philosopher's name, and then put the book, and then put the quotation. That way, you're using someone else's words, but you're saying, these are someone else's words. That's the whole point of that phrase that goes in front of the quotation or paraphrase. Because I want you to use other people's words and ideas, but I want you to use them correctly. You got to tell me, this is from someone else. This is not me. This is from someone else. Who are they? What's the name of the book you got it out of, and what's the name of the author? Put that right in front. You know, in Plato's Phaedrus, Plato writes blah, 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 blah. See, and then I know that's not you, that's Plato. But sometimes what my students will do is they'll forget to do that. And they will just start putting Plato's words in their paper. And they figure, I know where it's from. And I do. And I won't give you an F for plagiarism on that. Some people might. Why? Because if you don't put, let's say you forget quotation marks, right? You say Plato said, and then you put what he said, exact words, but you don't put quotation marks. Well, if you don't put quotation marks, it means it's your interpretation of what he said. But if it's exactly the words that he used or exactly the words from the translation, you made it look like they were your words, but they're actually the translator's words. That's plagiarism. Now, I won't fail you for that. But again, I mentioned some teachers are looking for a fucking excuse, so don't give it to them. If you're using someone's exact words, you gotta put quotation marks around there. The other thing students do is I ask students to put things in their own words. So oftentimes I'll have my students quote, and then in other words, and then they put the quote in their own words. When you say in other words, what you mean is the way I would, here's what Plato said, blah, 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 blah. In other words, here's the way I would put it. And then they put it in their own words. That's good, I like that. The problem is that if you say, I'm gonna put it in other words, and those words are also not yours, right? If it's too close to the original quote, if your in other words is actually the same words, see, then that's sort of getting into a plagiarism territory, because you said this was going to be how you would say it, but it's not. It's how somebody else said it, maybe how Plato said it. So you got to be, when you're at the in other words part, you got to say it the way you would say it. And when you use exact words from someone else, you got to put it in quotation marks. Otherwise, you can get in trouble for plagiarism. And again, it's possible, I won't do it to you, but it's possible you can get in trouble for plagiarism if you don't put that thing at the beginning of the quote. You got to say, in this book, this author says blah, 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 blah. If you just go blah, 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 maybe it's going to look like it's yours, especially if you forgot those quotation marks, and then you're going to be in kind of plagiarism territory. So it's tricky and it's difficult, but that's what you got to do. Okay. There are some things which, there are some situations in which you can use outside knowledge that is not plagiarism. There's a couple of categories it's worth pointing out. If something is common knowledge or is available in a wide variety of sources, you can put it in your paper and you don't have to say where you got it from. So for example, if you want to say that Donald Trump is president of the United States, you do not need to quote a newspaper article. You don't need to quote a history book. It's just like everybody knows who the president is, right? You don't need to quote that. That's something everybody knows. Or if you want to say the date that World War II ended, that's in every history textbook is going to have that. That's all over the place. It's very, very easy to find out the date World War II ended, so you don't need to quote exactly where you got that from. But pretty much everything else, meaning any other direct quotations, any unusual facts, any opinions that other people have said, anybody else helping you with this thing, you're going to have to explain where did this work come from. Really, the only exception is things like who is the president of the United States and when did World War II end, because those are things that it's either everybody knows already or it is extraordinarily easy to find out because the information is in lots and lots of different places. But for anything else, you better tell me where you got it from and who said it. Yeah, okay. Cool. I think I'm done with this video. I'll pick it up in the next video.